Ronald Post. Ronald Post had grown disillusioned with his marriage and decided that hiring a hitman was the best solution to his problem. Most would agree that hiring a killer is an incredibly foolish move, but Post managed to take this ill-conceived idea even further. Instead of carefully researching or being discreet, he approached someone he believed to be a hitman in the middle of a crowded shopping mall food court. Unfortunately for Post, the man he attempted to hire was actually an undercover police officer. The scene must have been almost comical as Post casually walked up and inquired about the cost to eliminate his wife. The officer initially might have thought it was a joke. However, Post was entirely serious, ironically without intending any humor, as he detailed his plan to the officer, unaware that he was essentially confessing to a crime in public. He even suggested paying for the hit with a credit card, unwittingly creating a perfect paper trail for the authorities. Needless to say, Post's attempt to orchestrate a hit was thwarted almost as soon as it began. He was arrested right there and then, charged with solicitation of murder because he failed to perform even a basic check on the supposed hitman. Stephen Griffiths. Stephen Griffiths was a PhD student in criminology. You'd think someone immersed in the study of crime would steer clear of committing them, but Griffiths did the opposite. In 2010, he embarked on a killing spree in Bradford, England, taking the lives of 3 workers using a crossbow, an act that alone was horrific. However, his crimes didn't stop there, which is how he earned the chilling nickname Crossbow Cannibal. After killing his victims, Griffiths dismembered their bodies and consumed parts of them. Adding to his audacity, Griffiths was bold enough to nickname himself and openly boast about his actions in online forums. Flaunting his gruesome acts on the internet is hardly the hallmark of a criminal mastermind. When the police caught up with him, they didn't need to conduct an intricate sting or forensic analysis. Griffiths had practically wrapped himself up as a gift for them. In one of his online boasts, he inadvertently revealed enough details about his deeds that led authorities right to his doorstep. Ultimately, the crossbow cannibal was sentenced to life in prison, ironically offering him plenty of time to continue his criminology studies from a much different perspective, with what one might darkly joke as hands-on experience. Anthony Garcia. Anthony, a former doctor ousted from a distinguished hospital in Omaha, Nebraska, was deeply upset, possibly even harboring resentment toward his former colleagues. Rather than dealing with his dismissal in a mature manner, he opted for a path of revenge that would confound even the simplest of minds. His initial act of vengeance involved tampering with the luxury car of one of the doctors who had a hand in his firing. This act, however, did little to satisfy his desire for retribution. Over the following years, Anthony meticulously plotted and carried out 5 murders targeting several doctors and their families, unable to let go of his grudge. Despite his medical training, which one might assume lent him some acumen, he left behind obvious clues. He consistently used the same type of ammunition across the murders and even dropped a uniquely patterned makeup compact at a crime scene, essentially providing a bright clue pointing right back to him. In a bold and reckless move, Anthony attended the funeral of one of his victims, brazenly displaying his connection to the crime in front of both law enforcement and the mourning families. This audacious move sealed his fate. The abundance of evidence, combined with his appearance at the funeral, led investigators directly to him. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, ending his ill-conceived campaign for vengeance. Peter Goebbels. During World War II, Peter Goebbels served as the Minister of Propaganda for Nazi Germany. His job was to disseminate propaganda and misinformation to drum up support for the Nazi regime and its agendas. Despite his earnest efforts, his approaches were often seen as ridiculous, ineffective, and excessively devoted to a certain leader with a distinctive mustache. To give an example, consider the city of Dresden, a cultural and industrial hub in eastern Germany that remained mostly untouched by bombings until February 1945. That month, the Allied forces conducted air raids that resulted in a catastrophic firestorm, leading to extensive destruction and the loss of many civilian lives. In reaction to these bombings, Goebbels initiated a massive propaganda campaign, framing the attacks as a war crime to garner public opposition against the Allies. His campaign was laced with extreme hyperboles and outright falsehoods. He asserted that the bombings had killed over 200,000 civilians, a number later shown to be significantly exaggerated. As the downfall of Hitler's regime became evident, most rational individuals would have taken their families away from the looming chaos. However, Goebbels, ever the fervent supporter, made the tragic choice to remain in Berlin. In a turn of events, he directed his family doctor to administer cyanide to his 6 children, an action far removed from any accolades of fatherhood. Subsequently, he and his wife ended their lives with suicide pills. Dennis der Ordinary, or rather, Dennis Rader, was a compliance officer and lived in Park City, Kansas, presenting himself as a typical family man. But hidden beneath this exterior was a sinister reality. Rader was the infamous BTK killer, responsible for terrorizing the Wichita area and claiming 10 lives, including men, women, and children, from 1974 to 1991. His method involved planning and cruel execution, often binding and torturing his victims before their deaths. Rader harbored a huge ego, paired with a relentless craving for attention and acclaim. His ego, if visualized as a balloon, would rival a blimp, swelling larger with every crime he committed. Despite the heinous nature of his acts, Rader managed to evade capture for over a decade, maintaining a low profile as any seasoned criminal might. However, after 14 silent years, his desire for recognition pushed him to reintroduce himself as the BTK killer in a catastrophically foolish manner. In a bid for infamy, Rader sent a floppy disk containing details of his crimes to a local news station. He believed the disk was anonymous, but it actually contained a digital trail that led directly back to his computer at the church where he was president of the Congregation Council. As if gifting the police his address wasn't enough, Rader's hubris drove him to send a package to the police with jewels from one of his victims. His overwhelming desire to be acknowledged as Wichita's most notorious killer ultimately overshadowed his instincts for self-preservation. This led to his arrest after more than 3 decades of evading law enforcement. The Monster of Andes. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Andes witnessed the horrific spree of Pedro Lopez, a killer who roamed across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, claiming the lives of around 160 women and girls. Many of his victims were young, some as young as 8 years old, who were deceived by his charm and then brutally assaulted. Clearly, Lopez was not using his charisma for any good purpose. While any cautious individual would tread lightly under such grave circumstances, Lopez seemed to revel in his notoriety, leaving a clear trail of bodies and evidence behind him. It was almost as though he aimed to emulate a horror movie villain. One of his most reckless habits was returning to the sites of his previous crimes, as if he was mocking the authorities and challenging them to catch him, turning his horrifying acts into a twisted game with the lives of innocent children at stake. But perhaps his most absurd decision was his repeated confessions of his crimes. During his travels, he would boast about his deeds to anyone who would listen, offering detailed and chilling accounts of his actions without a trace of remorse or concern for the potential consequences. This disregard for prudence and common sense inevitably led to his downfall. After one too many reckless admissions, the authorities finally connected the dots and apprehended the so-called Monster of the Andes, ending his reign of terror, only resulting in a 16-year prison sentence. Israel Key. Israel Keyes was a deeply disturbed individual, possibly psychopathic, known for his careful approach to choosing his victims. He would travel extensively across the United States, searching for remote areas and unsuspecting individuals to target. A former Army member, Keyes was good at concealing his activities, which made him especially dangerous. However, his careful methods faltered disastrously with his last victim, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig, whom he abducted from a coffee stand in Anchorage on a cold night in early 2012. Under Keyes' strict supervision, he allowed Samantha to use the bathroom before ultimately ending her life. In a bold move, he then demanded a ransom of $330,000 from her grieving family, despite knowing that Samantha was already deceased. His decision to use her debit card was a critical mistake. This action left a digital trail that allowed investigators to track down surveillance footage of him using the card. Key's extensive travels and precautions unraveled quickly due to this error. He was apprehended in March 2012 outside Loretta, California, where he admitted to killing Koenig and confessed to planning and carrying out several other murders over the previous decade. During his interactions with law enforcement, Keyes exuded a confident and almost boastful attitude, proudly discussing his crimes and revealing 16 additional victims previously unknown to authorities. He seemed to thrive on the image of being a criminal mastermind. In an unexpected turn of events, less than a year after his arrest, Keyes took his own life in December 2012 using a bedsheet in his jail cell, denying authorities the opportunity to fully prosecute him for his extensive list of heinous acts. Joel Rifkin. In the early 1990s, New York City was shaken by a series of discoveries. Law enforcement found dismembered remains scattered across the city, each discovery more horrifying than the last. At the center of this macabre series was Joel Rifkin, a man who appeared ordinary, yet harbored a dark secret. While most people involved in such activities would go to great lengths to conceal their actions, Rifkin seemed almost eager to be caught. He left behind a trail of evidence so obvious, it was as if he lacked any understanding of the principle, out of sight, out of mind. One of his most glaring errors was his choice of disposal sites for his victims' remains, often public areas where he left incriminating evidence that led straight back to him. It seemed as though he was practically inviting the police to catch him. However, the most foolish of all his choices was the vehicle he used to transport his victims' remains. Instead of choosing something inconspicuous, he used his own pickup truck, which bore a personalized license plate that made it extremely identifiable. This choice made it almost too easy for the authorities. Indeed, it was this very truck that led to his undoing. After several careless mistakes, the police intercepted Rifkin with a dismembered body in the back of his truck, leading to what could only be described as an incredibly awkward traffic stop. Rifkin confessed to 17 murders following his arrest, and his admissions were crucial in securing his conviction, resulting in a 23-year prison sentence. David Berkowitz. It was the summer of 1976 in New York City, and a string of seemingly random shootings had the city in a state of panic. The police were baffled, and the public was in fear, constantly on edge about where the next attack would strike. David Berkowitz was under the belief that his neighbor's dog, of all things, was possessed by demons and dictating that he commit these horrific acts. Over a year, Berkowitz carried out a murderous rampage, shooting innocent people in cold blood, all under the supposed command of this demonic canine. The situation reached a point of surreal absurdity during his trial, where jurors had to listen with straight faces as Berkowitz explained his motives, insisting that a hellish dog was behind it all. Unlike more cautious criminals, Berkowitz reveled in the chaos he created, leaving letters at the crime scenes that mocked the police and detailed his delusions about demonic dogs and satanic forces urging him to kill. In a particularly ill-advised move, Berkowitz parked his car near one of the crime scenes and left it there for hours, practically handing the police the clue they needed to track him down. Sure enough, they traced the car back to him, promptly ending his spree of terror. One might think that such bizarre claims might earn him some leniency on grounds of insanity, but the court was not swayed by his dog-made-me-do-it defense. Berkowitz received a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. Yet, the wild tale leaves some wondering, if just for a moment, if the dog might actually have been the mastermind he claimed.